on the News Channel 5 network. This is OpenLine.
Hi everyone, I'm News Channel 5's Chris Conte in tonight for Ben Hall on OpenLine. The topic tonight is going to be transit, something that is a hot button issue right now across the city of Nashville and of course across this mayoral race that is in the dead heat right now between Megan Barry and Mr. Fox. We have with us today Steve Bland, the CEO of the Metro Transit Authority. Steve, I think it's because this affects everyone every day.
Right.
That's why everyone is talking about this so much. Is that what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also reflective of all the bigger changes in Nashville with the growth, certainly manifested in congestion, Chris, over the last few years. I remember when I started here about a year ago, I had lunch with a couple of folks and one person saying, why do we need transit? Nashville's a 20-minute town. You can get anywhere in 20 minutes. And the other saying, yeah, but 10 years ago it was a 15-minute town. So I think that's what people are running into.
A reminder to people out there, if you want to call in and chat with Steve here from the MTA, you want to chat with us, get in on the conversation about mass transit, the number to call is 615-737-PLUS. That's 615-737-7587. Steve, I think one thing that, maybe is part of the problem or kind of, part of the issue. I have a friend of mine who is from Kentucky. He's from this, near Tennessee, and I grew up outside of Boston, where we have, I just grew up with mass transit in my blood. I mean, you took the subway, you took the bus, you took the you took the commuter rail. It was just part of, it was how you got around, and you were used to it. And I remember when AMP was still alive, and there was the big debate going on with it. And I had mentioned to this friend who was from here originally, we were talking about AMP. And he said, well, even if that gets off the ground, I just don't know if that's something that I'm interested in, that I want to be on or be a part of. It just seems like maybe that's not for me. So is there almost a cultural or societal shift that has to go on here too to get people transitioned into more mass transit?
Yeah, I think that's true to some extent, Chris, but I also think it's really a consumer choice model. As some of our options, our traditional options like driving, get more difficult, people will look for better alternatives. And if we can make transit faster, more reliable, more convenient than driving, and there are a lot of markets where I think we can do that, then people will take a look at those options. When we moved to Nashville about a year ago, we were walking around the neighborhood where we ultimately bought a home. I was talking to one of the neighbors out there. He asked me why we were coming to Nashville. I said, oh, I'm coming to run the transit agency. And he says, oh, moved here from San Francisco, love transit, use transit. I just wish we had some here. So I think to some extent your experience and experiences like that, will also drive the market. People who are coming here from those larger markets that are more used to transit and frankly expect it.
Right, and you talk about the city's growth, and there are so many transient people here coming from other cities who are used to having mass transit in some form or another in more ways than we have it here. And so the question is, will they start using it if we, as we start expanding?
Exactly. And one of the things I always say is, we're not going to try to design a system that meets everyone's needs all the time. We have a certain market that we really have to be aware of, and those are the folks who have no other choice. We need to make sure they have maximum opportunity for access to economic job opportunities, what have you. But in terms of folks who do have a choice, it doesn't have to be for every trip. It might be for the work trip, or it might be to come into town for a Predators game. So really taking a look at where we can be effective, and then working with the other modes, working with autos, working with people like Uber and Lyft.
How much of this is political? I don't want to get into, deep into politics, but how much is this is dependent on kind of who's above you guys? I mean, you guys you're a city agency, so you're kind of beholden to folks above you in terms of funding and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Well, I'd say in the big picture political, when you think of political as representing, what people want and need in a region or in an area, it's absolutely political. I think in terms of, current races, whether it's recent Metro Council races, pending mayoral election, or the regional elections in the outlying counties, it's an issue that everybody's aware of. It's an issue that really has, in the last 5 or 6 years, risen kind of the top of the attention span. So I don't think it's as much an issue of trying to build support for a transit investment. It's trying to make sure that we have the right plans in place and the right level of public engagement.
I'm curious what you think about this argument or this statement that is getting thrown around a lot now, that Nashville is becoming Atlanta. When you hear that, what do you think?
Well, I do think it's fine. I came here from outside the area. I came here from the Northeast. And when I would start meeting with folks in Nashville to kind of kick off the job, one of the things I would ask is, have you been to other cities that you think are really doing a great job with this? And people would say different things. They'd mention different cities. Common thread, every single person said, but we don't want to become Atlanta. So I think the issue is not that it's not just transit, it's how we deal with the pedestrian environment, how we make the city more walkable, patterns of development. I mean, one of the challenges we have in building effective transit is that Nashville isn't as dense a city as some others, but it's getting more dense when you look at the rapid development of areas like the Gulch or West End or the emerging development in East Nashville. Those are becoming very transit-ripe markets.
Interesting. We have some callers online. Let's see if we can get to them briefly here. I believe we have Greg on line 1. Greg, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
Hey, this is Chris and Steve from the MTA. What part of town do you live in, first of all?
Well, I live down in Franklin, Brentwood area.
Okay. What's your question or your comment?
Well, I mean, this is just, to me, it's politics like usual. You know, the people of Nashville have already spoken, and they don't want AMP. But I believe it's more or less the politicians want AMP. So I think just a couple of weeks ago, a big portion of downtown, the politicians made it illegal for a whole part of the part of Main Street there, or whatever, Broad or whatever, to where they covered all the parking meters up to where now you can't park your car down there. So what I see happening is the politicians of this state they want that money, they want the federal dollars, they want AMP. The citizens don't want AMP. They don't want this. We want to be able to drive our cars down there and get in and out of our cars and be free to do what we want to do. But the politicians are doing the complete opposite to force us into having something like AMP because that's what they want. So it's just, if you don't keep building big sky-rise buildings down there, you won't have parking problems. But I think they're intentionally building the new baseball stadium down there. What has that done for parking? And then right there where the new stadium is, they're putting high-rise apartments in. What is that going to do for parking? So I see through this, it's just politics like usual. The politicians want AMP. They want this transit, big, expensive transit thing going in there. The citizens don't want it, but since the politicians won't take no for an answer, they're going to make it to where we have to have something because they're going to mess up the traffic so bad downtown that you won't even be able to walk down there unless you got a sidewalk that moves.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg. I think, though, it's important to point out that politics aside, there are people moving downtown in mass numbers, and there are people moving into the Gulch and West End. And so, no matter what, who's in charge politically, you're going to have to deal with this in some fashion or form.
Well, and I do think it is responding to consumer choice. And Greg raises a couple of interesting points. First of all, let's be clear. The AMP isn't happening. That project is not on the books. There's no plan to move forward with the AMP. We're right now doing a strategic planning process to see what will work most effectively. But the argument is this isn't a politically created animal. This is a product of the projections that say over the next 25 years we expect 1 million more people to move to Middle Tennessee. So those are the folks who are creating demand for the downtown development, the suburban development, the higher density development, and they need to move around in all that. Nashville's about the Nashville metropolitan region is 36th largest in the country. Per capita, we are 18th in freeway lane miles per capita, but we're 11th in congestion. So what it's saying is, even though we have a lot of highways, a lot of ways to get around by car, they are more congested than average. We're 73rd in transit ridership. So I think from the standpoint of creating an effective mobility system, one that provides choice, it really is public transit right now in this region that's coming up somewhat short. Right,
and you can only have so many parking spaces in one area before you need to figure out a different way to move people into that spot.
Exactly.
It's going to be an issue that is going to affect the city for quite a long time. We're going to take a quick break. We do have some more people on the line. If you'd like to join in on the conversation here on OpenLine, the number is 615-737-PLUS. That's 615-737-PLUS. And we will be right back.